The orchestra was still playing when the doors of the Imperial Sapphire Hall opened. Not loudly, not violently, just enough for the cool night air to slip inside and brush against the heat of the gala. But somehow, that tiny shift changed everything. Because standing in the doorway, framed by gold light and a line of stunned attendants, was the one woman Duke Kellan Adebayo had made sure would never appear that night. His wife, Duchess Amara Adebayo. The room did not gasp all at once. It happened in ripples. One sharp inhale near the front tables, then another. Then silence spread across the ballroom like a stain no one could stop. Forks hovered in midair. A champagne glass slipped in somebody's hand and nearly shattered on the marble floor. At the center of it all stood Kellan, one hand still resting at the back of the woman he had proudly brought in Amara's place. Zara Okonkwo. Beautiful, polished, camera-ready Zara, whose smile had dazzled half the room only moments earlier, now stood stiff as lacquer beneath the chandeliers. Her face was still arranged in elegance, but her eyes had changed. She had looked victorious when she entered that hall. Now she looked afraid. Amara did not rush. She did not tremble. She did not even look angry. That was what made the sight of her so terrifying. She moved forward one measured step at a time, her black velvet gown gliding over the floor, emerald stones resting at her throat like fragments of frozen fire. In one gloved hand, she held a slim ivory envelope. In the other, a dark leather folio. Nothing about her was loud, and yet the entire room felt as if thunder had arrived. Kellan swallowed so hard the movement showed in his jaw. He had imagined many endings to this night. Investors applauding, newspapers praising him, Zara smiling at his side while photographers captured the beginning of a new era for House Adebayo. But not this. Never this. Amara stopped just inside the hall and lifted her eyes to him. "Please," Kellan said under his breath, though whether it was a plea, a warning, or an attempt to control what was already lost, even he did not know. Amara's face did not move. "No," she said quietly. "Tonight, you will not speak first. And if you love stories where pride destroys loyalty, where betrayal dresses itself in silk, and where the woman they tried to hide returns with the truth in her hands, then stay with me until the end. Because what happened in that ballroom did not only ruin a lie, it exposed an empire built on one." To understand why that hall went silent for Amara Adebayo, you have to understand who she was, before people began calling her difficult, cold, or inconvenient. Years earlier, before the scandals and headlines, before the luxury magazines and political dinners, she had been the brightest thing in Kellan's life. Not because she glittered, because she grounded him. Amara Ndlovu had not been born inside palaces or raised among men who treated titles like oxygen. She came from a respected family of educators and land planners in the Eastern Highlands, a family with old dignity but not theatrical wealth. She was known for her mind long before anyone noticed her beauty. By 26, she had already helped design irrigation systems for 3 provinces and built scholarship partnerships for girls in districts most elites could not locate on a map. When Kellan met her, he was still charming in the way that fools people. Warm smile, soft voice, generous posture. The kind of man who knew how to listen just long enough to seem rare. Back then, he spoke about service, legacy, reform. He said he wanted to inherit his father's title differently. He wanted to modernize the duchy, protect family lands, restore schools, and make the House of Adebayo mean something more than old portraits and expensive dinners. Amara believed him. That was her great mistake. Their marriage had begun in genuine affection. Palace staff adored her almost immediately, not because she performed sweetness for them, but because she saw them. She remembered names, sent fruit to a footman whose mother was ill, reopened the duchy clinic using funds from a budget no one else had been willing to touch. She turned neglected kitchens into nutrition centers for surrounding villages. She walked the estate without cameras. She asked old gardeners what had failed and why. She sat with widows who had served the family for decades and treated them like archives of wisdom instead of furniture. For a while, Kellan admired all of it. And then the invitations got bigger, the stakes got higher, and admiration turned into embarrassment. House Adebayo had always carried elegance, but not endless money. The title was ancient, the accounts were not. After his father's death, Kellan inherited more appearance than power. Properties needed repairs, farms were underperforming, corporate holdings were tangled in debt. The family foundation looked impressive in brochures, but thin in reality. It was Amara who began quietly saving them. She renegotiated 2 agricultural leases, She convinced an international development group to back a green textile cooperative on duchy land. She helped establish a women-led processing plant that doubled revenue in less than a year. The clinic she had restored ended up drawing the goodwill press Kellan could never purchase on his own. Yet as the duchy's fortunes improved, Kellan's soul began to shrink. Because success had not made him grateful. It had made him hungry. Soon he was no longer satisfied with recovery. He wanted spectacle. He wanted magazine covers. He wanted his name attached to luxury summits, global charity galas, private aviation forums, elite leadership councils, and foundations whose language was about compassion, but whose real purpose was access. And Amara, with her seriousness, her refusal to flirt with cameras, and her habit of asking what impact money would actually have, began to feel to him like a badly chosen truth at a beautifully staged lie. Then Zara Okonkwo arrived. She came into their orbit wearing brilliance like armor. Zara was not foolish. She was very good at the game Kellan had started craving. She knew lighting, language, donor psychology, and how to make greed sound visionary. She had built a public identity around luxury philanthropy and social influence, drifting between investment circles, charity boards, and elite event platforms with the confidence of someone who had learned early that most powerful men did not need to be tricked, only reflected. She called Kellan a sleeping brand. He loved her for it. At first, Amara tried to be fair. Zara was introduced as a consultant for the duchy's new cultural redevelopment project. Her proposals were sleek. Her presentations glittered. She spoke about monetizing legacy experiences, premium heritage retreats, gala partnerships, branded restoration, investor storytelling. Whenever Amara asked who the local communities benefited from any of it, Zara smiled as if explaining gravity to a child. The narrative benefit reaches everyone eventually, she would say. Eventually. It became one of Amara's most hated words. The first public insult came disguised as scheduling, a museum opening, a diplomatic dinner, a foundation preview. Each time, Kellan would touch Amara's arm and say some version of the same thing. You've been working too hard. You don't enjoy these rooms. It may be better if Zara handles this one. Exactly, it's all strategy, darling. Don't take it personally. But she did take it personally, because it was personal. She knew the difference between protection and replacement. The lie became impossible to ignore the night she overheard Kellan speaking to a donor on the West Terrace. The man had laughed and asked whether the Duchess would be attending the Royal Meridian Gala in the winter. And Kellan, without hesitation, had replied, "No, those rooms require a certain kind of shine. Amara is better with fieldwork than spectacle." Better with fieldwork than spectacle. Amara stood in the dark just beyond the terrace doors, one hand pressed against the cold glass, and felt something inside her close forever. It was not heartbreak. Heartbreak still hopes. This was recognition. After that, she stopped asking for honesty. She started looking for evidence. What she found was worse than humiliation, because Kellan was not only pushing her out of public life, he was using her absence to hide theft. It began with a ledger discrepancy in the Adebayo Renewal Trust, a charitable structure Amara herself had helped formalize. 2 transfers marked as infrastructure disbursements had passed through shell entities she did not recognize. Then there were consultancy payments tied to Zara's advisory network. Then a land review report that listed community-owned acreage as underutilized ceremonial estate reserve. Ceremonial estate reserve. A beautiful phrase for stolen land. Amara kept reading. The targeted properties were not random. They included the widow's farming cooperative she had funded in her first year of marriage, the girls' scholarship retreat center outside Maseko Ridge, and a strip of river-adjacent land the duchy had publicly promised, to preserve for local families displaced by historic flooding. Someone was preparing to repackage obligation as opportunity. Someone was preparing to sell conscience as luxury. And every signature trail led back to Kellan's private office, Zara's consultancy team, and an attorney named Darius Biko, a man famous for making ugly transactions look ceremonial. Amara did not confront Kellan right away. That surprised even her. But instinct had finally overtaken pain. If she accused him too early, he would deny, spin, and relocate everything before dawn. Men like Kellan did not panic when women cried. They panicked when women documented. So Amara became quiet, quieter than he had ever seen her. He mistook it for defeat. That was his second great mistake. For 6 weeks, she moved like a shadow through the house he thought he controlled. She met privately with the estate archivist, an 80-year-old woman named Ma Dineo, who knew where every original land covenant had been stored before digitization made forgery fashionable. She requested tax copies under the Foundation's compliance authority. She spoke to a junior finance officer who had been dismissed after refusing to backdate documents. She reviewed old trust clauses written by Kellan's grandfather, clauses no one assumed she had ever read. By the end of the second month, she knew 3 things. First, Kellan intended to unveil a new Royal Legacy Revival Fund at the coming Royal Gala. Second, Zara expected to be introduced publicly not as a consultant, but as the strategic face of that future. And third, the launch event itself was being partly financed with restricted charity money meant for rural maternal clinics. Amara did not cry when she learned that. She laughed. Not because it was funny, because the arrogance was finally so large it looked stupid. She began planning. If Kellan wanted spectacle, she would give him spectacle. But hers would survive daylight. The next phase required allies, and for the first time in months, Amara let people see exactly what had been done to her. Not in dramatic speeches, in documents, in dates, in signatures, in account trails. A forensic auditor named Luyanda Mbeki took one look at the transfers and said, "This is not messy accounting. This is choreography." A retired judge who owed Amara nothing but respect agreed to review the trust violations. 2 investors who had once worked with her on climate-backed infrastructure quietly stepped forward after learning their promised community impact funds had been redirected toward gala production and private hospitality. Even the palace's old chauffeur, Baba Cello, produced something useful. Recordings from late-night rides where Darius Beko and Zara had discussed removing the wife from the visual equation before launch season. That line alone would have destroyed reputations. But Amara was no longer interested in scandal for scandal's sake. She wanted consequence. Meanwhile, Kellan drifted deeper into fantasy. He began appearing in public more often with Zara. Not openly intimate in ways that tabloids could easily print, but close enough to wound, polished enough to imply succession. Their photos spread across event blogs and society pages. Zara laughing beside him at a design summit. Zara seated next to him at a donor brunch. Zara standing where a duchess should have stood during a heritage restoration announcement. People began whispering. Then they began assuming. A few even suggested Amara had become too unstable, too austere, too difficult for public life. A woman disappears from the room long enough, and shallow people do not ask who shut the door. They ask what flaw in her must have deserved it. Amara heard the rumors, and let them ripen. Because rotten things collapse better when nobody interrupts them. 3 days before the Royal Gala, Kellan visited her sitting room for the first time in weeks. He did not come to apologize. He came to manage.
"You should stay away on Thursday,"
he said, standing near the window, as though proximity itself might stain him.
"The press will be intense, and the board has decided to keep the launch streamlined." "The board?"
Amara asked. He ignored the tone.
"It would be better for everyone if the evening stayed focused."
On what? On fraud? On humiliation? On replacing your wife beneath chandeliers you could never afford without her work? But Amara said none of it. She merely looked at him and asked,
"Better for everyone? Or better for you?"
Something flickered in his expression then. Shame, perhaps, or the memory of it. But Kellan had spent too long polishing his vanity to wear shame well.
"You always make things harder than they need to be,"
he said. Amara smiled.
"No, Kellan. I think I'm about to make them exact."
He left irritated, not alarmed, still not understanding. The morning of the gala, the city woke under silver cloud and restless gossip. The Royal Meridian Gala was the event of the season, a collision of money, old titles, cameras, ministries, luxury brands, and every ambitious person within reach of a tailored jacket. By noon, society pages were already speculating about Zara's role that night. Fashion accounts posted predictions. Financial blogs hinted at a major announcement from House Adebayo. No one mentioned Amara. She dressed in silence, not in white, not in fragile blue, not in anything that asked to be forgiven. She chose black velvet cut with disciplined elegance, emeralds inherited from her grandmother, and gloves the color of midnight. Ma Dineo fastened the necklace herself and looked at her with eyes full of old storms.
"Child,"
the old woman said softly.
"are you sure?"
Amara took the leather folio from the table.
"I have never been more sure of anything."
By 8:30, the ballroom was blazing. Kellan arrived to cameras and approval. Zara entered at his side in liquid gold, every flashbulb answering exactly as she had hoped. They moved through the receiving line like a coronation rehearsal. Ministers nodded, investors smiled, influencers posted. The host announced the coming Heritage Fund as a visionary leap into the future. And at first, the future looked like it belonged to them. Then came the speech. Kellan took the stage just before the final dinner course, glass in hand, smile sharpened for donors. He spoke about responsibility, modernization, legacy, and brave partnerships. He thanked ministers, thanked benefactors, thanked Zara, whose strategic brilliance had helped shape a new chapter for cultural stewardship and global engagement. Applause rose. Zara lowered her eyes and practiced humility. Then Kellan said the line that would finish him. "Tonight," he announced, "we turn tradition into relevance." He lifted his hand toward the screen behind him, and that was when the ballroom doors opened. The sound was soft, but every head turned. Amara entered alone for exactly 3 steps. Then the rest followed. A compliance officer from the National Charity Commission, 2 legal representatives from the Land Trust Tribunal, investor delegates, and behind them, not photographers invited by Kellan's PR team, but journalists from financial and public accountability desks. Now the room was not simply shocked. It was alert. Kellan's face drained in real time. Zara's fingers clamped around her clutch so tightly the metal frame bit into her skin. Amara walked toward the center aisle as if the ballroom had always belonged to her. She did not look left or right. She did not acknowledge the whispers bursting around her. When she finally stopped, she was close enough for Kellan to see the calm in her eyes. That calm frightened him more than rage would have. "Amara," he said into the microphone, trying to smile. "What a surprise." "No," she answered. "A surprise is something pleasant. This is an audit." The room broke. Not loudly, but internally. You could feel it. The way rich people freeze when glamour suddenly realizes it may become evidence. Kellan lowered the microphone and hissed, "Do not do this here." "Here," Amara said, "is exactly where you arranged it." She turned, not to him, but to the guests. "My husband has spoken tonight about stewardship," she said, her voice clear enough to reach the back of the ballroom without strain. "So let us discuss what he has been trying to steward out of existence." Luyanda Mbeki stepped to the AV desk and handed over a drive. The massive screen behind Kellan flickered. The first image appeared, trust documents bearing restricted fund labels for rural maternal clinics. Then the transfers. Then the consultancy disbursements to Zara's entities. Then the land reclassification files. Then the internal memos referring to local family acreage as convertible luxury corridor parcels. Someone in the front row whispered, "My God." Amara let the silence work. Then she opened the ivory envelope. "These," she said, lifting several certified pages, "are the original covenants for the Maseko lands, signed decades before any of us entered this room. They cannot be sold for private redevelopment without tribunal consent. No such consent was given, yet offers were drafted." She looked at Kellan. "You signed them anyway." A minister seated near the stage shifted back, as if distance could erase association. Zara finally found her voice. "This is a malicious misunderstanding," she said, stepping forward with desperate polish. "Strategic holding structures are often used during early-phase preservation planning." "Preservation?" Amara cut in. She turned another page. "Would you like me to read your private message to Darius Beko from 6 weeks ago?" Zara's lips parted. Amara did not wait. Once the wife is kept off stage, the heritage sale becomes visually clean. The sentence landed like a blade. Several heads swung toward Zara so sharply it was almost theatrical. Kellan stepped down from the stage. Enough! But it was not enough. Not nearly. Amara drew one breath, then delivered the blow he would never recover from. "The gala you are all attending tonight," she said, "was partially financed using restricted health funds intended for maternal clinics in 3 districts. That changed the room. Fraud against the rich is scandal. Fraud against mothers and children is poison. The investors who had smiled all evening no longer looked uncertain. They looked betrayed. One woman from a development consortium was already typing on her phone. A board chairman refused to sit back down. The compliance officer near the doorway quietly handed a sealed notice to Darius Beko, who had tried and failed to slip toward the side exit. Kellan looked suddenly smaller. Not physically. Morally. "This can be resolved privately," he said, and for the first time that night, everyone heard what his authority sounded like without obedience beneath it. "No," Amara replied. "Private is where you buried it. Public is where it belongs." She reached into her bag and withdrew a signet brooch engraved with the Adebayo crest, a ceremonial piece she had worn at state events since the year they married. For a moment, the hall was so silent, even the cameras seemed ashamed to click. Amara placed the brooch on the podium between them. "You were never embarrassed by my absence," she said. "You were afraid that truth beside you would make your performance look cheap." Kellan's eyes shone with anger, panic, and something even uglier: realization. Because now he understood. This was not an emotional scene he could dismiss as bitterness. This was structural. It had witnesses, dates, investigators, funders, documents, archived covenants, and legal authority. It had shape. And shape is what makes ruin permanent. Zara backed away first. It was almost graceful, the way instinct took over and self-preservation stripped the elegance from her face. One second she was standing under the chandeliers like a future duchess, the next she was calculating exits. But there was nowhere to go that did not pass through the truth. Darius Beko attempted to intervene, speaking rapidly to the compliance officers, but one of the tribunal representatives had already informed venue security that copies of the documents were lodged externally and injunction requests had been activated that afternoon. Account freezes were now a matter of process, not debate. Guests began checking their phones. The headlines had started. Not tomorrow, now. Kellan turned to Amara one last time and lowered his voice. "Why are you doing this?" A weaker woman might have answered with every wound, every night, every insult, every public erasure, every photograph where another woman stood in the place she had built. But Amara had moved beyond wound language, so she told him the truth that mattered. "Because what you tried to steal," she said, "did not belong to you." Then she stepped back. That was the moment the room chose sides, not because they suddenly became noble, because collapse has a smell, and the powerful are animals about survival. Men who had toasted Kellan an hour earlier avoided his eyes. Women who had praised Zara's brilliance turned their attention to Amara with fresh admiration, as if integrity were a trend they had always secretly supported. Cameras that had come to document luxury now captured disgrace. And above it all, Amara stood untouched. Not because she had escaped pain, because she had survived it long enough to weaponize clarity. The formal fallout was swift. The Charity Commission suspended the launch before dessert ended. The tribunal moved to freeze the contested land transfers. 2 donor groups announced immediate review of all Adebayo-associated projects. Zara's consultancy contracts evaporated before midnight. Darius Beko left under escort, still arguing procedure to people who no longer needed persuasion. Kellan remained in the ballroom long after most guests had begun leaving. He did not chase Amara. He did not shout. He simply stood there beside the podium where the family crest still lay, staring at the object as if it had become heavier than metal should be. Amara did not look back when she walked out. Outside, the air was colder than before. Cars lined the drive. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs exploded against the dark. But beyond the noise, at the edge of the entrance steps, stood the women from the Maseko Cooperative, invited quietly by Amara not to create spectacle, but to witness the first honest moment in a room that had priced them out of their own land. One of them, an older widow named Naledi, touched Amara's sleeve and whispered, "Did we keep it?" Amara looked at her, and for the first time that night, smiled without restraint. "Yes," she said, "we kept it." 3 months later, House Adebayo was no longer spoken of the same way. The old certainty was gone. Investigations widened, board appointments changed, accounts were audited line by line. Newspapers discovered that moral collapse was much easier to summarize once receipts existed. Kellan resigned from multiple public roles before he could be stripped of them. Zara released 2 statements, one legal, one emotional, and neither saved her reputation. Darius Beko was suspended pending formal proceedings. As for the duchy, it did not disappear. It changed hands in spirit before it changed in paperwork. Amara declined interviews for nearly 6 weeks. When she finally spoke, it was not from a ballroom or a television set. It was from the courtyard of the reopened Maseko Women's Enterprise School, where textile trainees, coders, bookkeepers, and agricultural apprentices now worked under a trust newly protected from private seizure. She did not talk about revenge. She talked about custody, about what happens when institutions are inherited by people who love applause more than duty, about why land, charity, and public trust must never be left at the mercy of vanity. People listened, because she had not merely exposed corruption, she had embodied an alternative to it. And Kellan? There were stories, of course. Some said he tried to reach her. Some said he sent letters. Some said he stood for nearly an hour one rainy evening outside the old clinic she had restored in her first year as Duchess, watching mothers enter with their children and realizing too late that everything of lasting value attached to his name had once passed through her hands first. Whether that is true hardly matters. What matters is this. He had believed image was stronger than substance, that glamour could replace loyalty, that a well-dressed lie could outlive a quiet truth. He was wrong. Because titles can open doors, Money can fill halls, and beauty can distract a room for a while. But when the woman you tried to erase walks back in carrying records, memory, law, and moral authority in the same hand, no chandelier is bright enough to save you. And in the end, that was the real scandal of the Royal Meridian Gala. Not that a duke brought another woman, but that he forgot the wife he was ashamed to display had been the one holding up his world all along.